I collapsed at 78 pounds from hunger, and my mom poured water on the floor while I begged for a sip. When I said, "The law says you have to give me water," she smiled and said, "What law?" "Down here, we make the rules." I just stared at the puddle soaking into the concrete. That was over a decade ago. This morning, her hands were shaking too badly to sign her confession. "How did your parents control what you ate?" Mine had a simple system. They required me to fast for 1 hour for each dollar they spent on me. They believed children should feel the weight of their burden on the family. A $20 purchase for new socks and underwear meant I wouldn't eat for almost a full day. They'd started when I turned 8. It was small at first. I asked for a $5 Barbie doll I'd seen at a garage sale. My mother bought it, and that evening, she explained that my father had worked hard for that $5, and to understand the value of sacrifice, I would be skipping breakfast the next day. 5 hours. It seemed simple, but then it was skipping lunch for a school field trip permission slip. Then dinner for a new notebook. They were teaching me, bite by bite, that my existence was a debt I could never repay. By the time I was 12, they solidified the rule into an ironclad law. And soon, I was fainting in class from accumulated fasting hours. The calculations ruled everything. Every meal I was allowed to eat was itself a future debt. Every pencil, every aspirin, every mandatory school fee added hours to my balance. Dinner was the main event. My father would sit at the head of the table, a pile of receipts next to his plate. My mother would serve him and herself a full meal: pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans. I would sit with an empty plate and a glass of water, which, in those early days, was still free. "Let's see," Dad would say, adjusting his glasses. He'd pick up a receipt. "Groceries from Monday, $35 for milk you drank last week. $50 for those secondhand shoes. Sarah, your feet grow too fast. That's a $15 burden. And $4 for mandatory school supplies," Mom would add, taking a delicate bite of roast. "That's 54 total. So 54 hours. You can start eating again." Thursday, around 6 p.m. My stomach would cramp violently, twisting into knots as the hours accumulated. I'd watch the gravy on my dad's plate, my mouth filling with saliva. Mom, an accountant by trade, created spreadsheets. She tracked my consumption patterns. She would print them out weekly and circle areas where I cost too much, usually basic necessities I couldn't avoid. "Look at this," she'd say, her red pen circling a number. "You used $8.50 in shampoo and soap this month. That's nearly 9 hours of fasting you imposed on the family. You need to learn to be more efficient. Use less." I spent every day paying off the debt they'd assigned me the day before. Sometimes the cycles overlapped, and the fasts would stretch on for days. One time I got a severe ear infection. The antibiotics insurance wouldn't cover cost $90. That was 90 hours. Nearly 4 full days without food. I remember lying on my bed, shivering with fever, the hunger pain a separate, sharper agony than the infection. During these hunger periods, they made me write thank you notes. My hands would be shaking so badly I could barely form the letters. "Dear Mom and Dad," I'd write, the pencil slipping in my sweaty palm. "Thank you for the $30 winter coat. I will gladly fast for 30 hours to show my appreciation for your sacrifice." I became an expert at calculating the cost of staying alive. A $2 notebook meant 2 hours of hunger, but failing a class meant summer school, which cost hundreds. That was an easy decision. But it wasn't always that straightforward. I'd stand in the school lunch line, my stomach aching, knowing that the $3.50 for a slice of pizza meant 3.5 hours of fasting that weekend. I'd almost always just get water and tell the lunch lady I wasn't hungry. I'd stand in store aisles, a ghost in dirty clothes, doing math in my head. Okay, I need new socks. They're $10. That's 10 hours. But I also have a field trip fee due. That's 15 hours. And I know Mom is buying groceries tonight. That's at least $20 for my share. 10 plus 15 plus 20, 45 hours. That's almost 2 days. Sometimes I'd put the socks back on the shelf and walk out with nothing, knowing my body couldn't take another dollar. I learned to darn my old socks until they were more thread than fabric. By the time I was 13, I was starving and I started begging for mercy. I'd wait until Mom seemed softer, usually after her second glass of evening wine, and plead for basic things without the fasting. I found her in the living room, the TV casting a blue glow on her face. "Mom," I whispered. "What is it, Sarah?" "I'm watching my show. I need tampons. For school. And And I'm already 40 hours behind from the flu medicine last week. Please, just this once. She'd turn and look at me, her eyes unfocused for a moment, then sharpening. She'd sigh and stroke my hair, her fingers cool on my feverish skin. It was the only affection I ever got, and it only came when I was desperate. "Oh, sweetie," she'd say sympathetically, her voice soft. "I know it's hard, but suffering builds character. We're doing this because we love you. We're making you strong." Her hand would trail down my cheek. "Someday you'll thank us for this." "But I'm so hungry," I'd cry, the hunger making me weak and emotional. "That's the lesson, don't you see?" She'd say, turning back to the TV. "That's how you know it's working." When I finally threatened to tell the school counselor, she didn't even flinch. "Go ahead," she said, sipping her wine. "They'll think you have an eating disorder, just like all the other little girls your age who don't have parents who care enough to teach them what a real problem feels like. They'll send you to a hospital, and that will cost thousands. Can you even imagine how many hours that would be? You'd never eat again." The threat worked. I shut my mouth. While other kids were complaining about homework, I spent nights curled around my empty stomach, trying to sleep through the sharp, gnawing pain. I didn't have friends. How could I? I couldn't relate to anyone, and I was so locked inside myself with hunger and shame. If I ever went out with anyone, I'd have to make excuses. Why I couldn't eat if it was during one of my fasts. Or why I was gorging myself like a feral animal if my hours were clear. Friends stopped inviting me places. I was the weird, skinny girl who never ate. Teachers questioned my parents about my weight, especially after I fainted during a history presentation. But Dad had rehearsed answers. "She's just hit a growth spurt, all legs." He'd laugh. "And she has a fast metabolism just like her mother. We can't put weight on her?" They were so charming, so believable. The day I collapsed during PE was different. We were running laps. I was already on 30 hours of fasting from a textbook rental. On the third lap, the world went gray at the edges. I remember the smell of cut grass, and then the feeling of my cheek hitting the dirt track. I woke up in the nurse's office, the smell of rubbing alcohol in my nose. The nurse, Mrs. Gable, was on the phone. She was not smiling. "No, I'm not satisfied with that answer, Mr. Harris. She's 14 years old and she weighs 78 pounds. Her blood pressure is dangerously low and she's severely dehydrated." She hung up and looked at me, her eyes kind but firm. "Honey, I'm going to be very direct. I've been a nurse for 20 years. This is not a fast metabolism. This is severe malnutrition." She handed me a tiny cup of apple juice. "I am required by law to call Child Protective Services." That was the first time I felt a spark of hope. The hope died an hour later. My parents arrived. They didn't storm in angry. They were worse. They were calm, concerned. They charmed Mrs. Gable, explaining that I had a rare digestive disorder that was very personal, and they were working with specialists. They had fake paperwork. They showed so much heartbreak that I was the one who had embarrassed them. My parents yanked me out of that school so fast I didn't even get to clean out my locker. "The state," my dad said, his eyes cold as steel as we drove home, "cannot understand our advanced parenting methods. They are too busy promoting mediocrity to recognize parents who are truly dedicated to building character." Homeschooling. It was a death sentence. It meant total control. No outside eyes. No teachers, no Mrs. Gable, no one to see me dying slowly in calculated increments, and nobody I could turn to for help. Homeschooling was a lie. There were no lessons, no curriculum, no state-mandated check-ins. My parents weren't homeschooling me. They were unschooling me. My education was a stack of my father's old business textbooks from the 1980s, dumped on a desk in my room. "Read these," he'd said. "Real-world knowledge. Better than that garbage they teach in public schools." But the books weren't the point. The isolation was. My world shrank to the four walls of our house. The only field trips were to the grocery store, where I was forced to watch silently as my mother and father loaded the cart with food I wouldn't be allowed to eat. My job was to push the cart and keep my mouth shut. Without the prying eyes of teachers and the potential charity of the school nurse, the rules became stricter. The calculations grew more punitive. There was no free water from a school fountain, no chance of a friend slipping me a piece of their lunch. Every drop I consumed was now itemized. "Jew 15 for that glass of tap water, Sarah," my mom would say, updating her spreadsheet. "Don't be wasteful." I was 15 and my vision started to fail. It wasn't gradual, it was a sudden blurring, like a film of petroleum jelly had been smeared over my eyes. The words in Dad's stupid business book swam together. I couldn't read the receipts he angrily shoved in my face. I developed a constant, pounding headache. I can't see, I finally told my mother, after tripping on the stairs for the third time in one day. Everything is fuzzy, she sighed, a sound of pure annoyance. An eye exam? Do you have any idea what that costs? That's an elective, Sarah, a luxury. I can't read the books, I whispered, my head down. It took them 2 weeks to approve the expense. My father finally scheduled an appointment at the cheapest strip mall optometrist he could find. The exam itself cost $75. You have severe astigmatism and myopia, the doctor said, looking at me with a mixture of pity and confusion. He kept glancing at my sallow skin and the hollows of my cheeks. You should have had glasses years ago. How on earth have you been functioning? I just shrugged. My mother fielded his questions with her practiced charm. She's just so dedicated to her studies, she never told us it was this bad. We feel terrible. The cheapest frames in the store, the ugly plastic government assistance ones, were another $100. That night at dinner, my father placed the 2 receipts on the table. My mother served him a double portion of chicken. I sat with my empty plate, my new ugly glasses sliding down my nose. So, my father announced, tapping the receipts. An eye exam, 75 hours glasses, $100. That is a total burden of $175. My blood ran cold. I did the math instantly. 175 hours. That's over 7 full days of fasting, I whispered, my voice shaking. I can't. I'm already behind 20 hours from my shampoo. Then I suggest you learn to make it last, don't you? My mother said, not looking up from her plate. You wanted to see? This is the price of sight. I knew my organs were already failing from years of starvation. The nurse had said 78 pounds. I felt lighter now. Another week without food wouldn't just make me faint. It would kill me. I could feel a cold, terrifying certainty in my bones. They were going to kill me over a pair of glasses. A new instinct kicked in. It wasn't rebellion, not yet. It was simpler. It was survival. The next time my mother took me to the grocery store, I did it. While she was comparing the prices of canned peas, I slipped down the snack aisle. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. My hands were shaking. I grabbed a granola bar, oats and honey, $1.19, and shoved it into the waistband of my jeans, pulling my baggy sweatshirt down over it. I didn't steal another thing. I just pushed the cart, my entire body rigid, waiting for the alarms from my mother's hand on my arm. Nothing. We checked out. We left. As soon as we got home and she was busy putting things away, I ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and tore the wrapper open with my teeth. I ate it in 3 bites, choking it down, swallowing before I could even taste it. It was the most delicious thing I had ever eaten. It was rebellion. It was life. I couldn't believe this was what my life had come to. I got bolder. I'd steal pretzels from a drugstore while my dad was picking up a prescription. I'd eat them in the public bathroom, crouched in a stall, shoving handfuls into my mouth and flushing the wrapper. Each stolen bite felt like a victory and a crushing defeat at the same time. My fasting periods became a performance. I'd act weaker, more dizzy. Yes, Mom, I'm feeling the lesson. Thank you. And all the while, I'd have a stolen protein bar tucked in my sock, waiting for a moment alone. I was a rat, learning to live on the scraps they didn't know they were leaving. This new stolen energy gave me clarity. I needed to get out, but how? I was a 15-year-old prisoner. My escape came from their own neglect. My homeschooling was so unsupervised that one day, when my father was at a rare all-day meeting and my mother was in bed with a migraine, a full bottle of wine, I walked out the front door. I just walked. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to be out. I ended up at the public library, a place I hadn't been in years. It was quiet. It was warm. And it was full of information. I was hiding in a remote corner, scarfing down a bag of pretzels I'd stolen from the drugstore on the way, when I saw a book someone had left on a table. It was a thick, boring-looking paperback. Children's Legal Rights, a guide for minors and advocates. I opened it, crumbs falling on the pages. I flipped to the index, neglect, malnutrition, abuse, and there it was. In clear black and white print. State law. Parents or legal guardians must provide adequate food, shelter, clothing, and medical care. unconditionally. It wasn't a privilege to be earned. It was a right. My parents hadn't just been cruel. They had been lying to me my entire life. They did legally owe me everything. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read. I didn't have money for the copier. I found a pencil at the desk and tore pages from the back of Dad's old business notebook I'd brought. I copied the statutes, the legal definitions, the hotline numbers. I shoved the pages deep into my backpack. That night at dinner, my father was reading from a new receipt. 12 for toilet paper. That's 12 hours you've cost this family, Sarah. I hope you're... This is illegal. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate. My father slowly lowered the receipt. What did you say? He asked. I pulled the notebook pages from my bag and set them on the table, right next to his plate of pot roast. This, what you're doing? It's child abuse. The law says you have to provide food and medical care. Unconditionally, you can't make me fast to pay for it. Silence. My mother stared at the pages, her face pale. My father's face went dark, a deep, terrifying red I hadn't seen before. He slowly read the words I had copied. You ungrateful bitch, my mother whispered, her voice trembling with a rage I'd never heard. After everything we've sacrificed for you. My father calmly folded the pages. He looked at me, his eyes flat and dead. Do you think I care what some book says? This is my house. I am the law. I started to panic. This wasn't the reaction I expected. I thought they'd be scared. I thought I'd won. You have to, I stammered, holding up the library book. It turns out, my father said, standing up, we've seen your rebellion coming even before you had, and we've prepared. He walked to the far end of the kitchen, to a door I'd never seen him open. It was a pantry, I'd always assumed. He pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked it. He opened the door to reveal a dark, narrow staircase leading down, to the basement. You think you're too good for our lessons? My mother was on her feet now. She grabbed my hair, yanking me out of the chair and toward the stairs. Let's see how your legal knowledge helps you down there. I fought back, but my malnourished 78-pound body had no strength. I screamed. They dragged me down the steps as I clawed at the walls. The door at the bottom was thick, solid wood. My father pushed me through, and I fell onto a bare mattress. The door slammed shut. I heard the heavy thud of a deadbolt and then the click of a padlock. We'll check on you in a week, my mom's voice drifted through the wood. By then, you'll be begging to show proper gratitude. Their footsteps faded, climbing the stairs. I heard the kitchen door close and lock. I was alone. I scrambled to the door, pounding on it until my fists were raw. Let me out, please! I'm sorry! Let me out! No one answered. I pressed my ear against the cold, solid door and wondered if anyone would ever find me. The darkness pressed against me like a physical weight, thick and suffocating. It was cold. Not just cool, but a deep, damp cold that seeped through my thin clothes and settled into my bones. For a long time, I just lay where I'd fallen on the bare mattress, my body curled into a tight ball, listening to the pounding of my own blood in my ears. The silence was absolute. My screams had faded and my throat was raw. They weren't coming back. This was real. Eventually, terror gave way to a cold, pragmatic need to know. I ran my hands along the walls. They weren't damp, unfinished cinder blocks. They were smooth, cold stone, professionally sealed. The floor was concrete. They had planned this. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment punishment. It was a pre-built contingency. My fingers found the bucket in the corner. The humiliation burned through me, a hot flash that momentarily warmed my skin, even as my body shook from hunger and fear. In the other corner was the mattress, thin and smelling of mildew. No blanket, no pillow. High above, a single bare bulb hung from a wire, too high to reach. The switch I knew must be upstairs. They controlled even the light, hours passed. Or maybe it was minutes. Time meant nothing in that stone box. My stomach had stopped cramping, which scared me more than the pain. When your body stops asking for food, you're dying. 78 pounds. The nurse had said 78 pounds. How much would I weigh after a week down here? I was starting to drift into a hazy, half-conscious state when the sound jolted me awake. The click of the padlock, the scrape of the deadbolt. I scrambled to the bottom of the stairs, hope surging through me. They'd reconsidered. They were letting me out. The door opened, silhouetting my mother against the bright kitchen light. She was holding a tall glass of water. She descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, her face unreadable in the glare. At the bottom, she stopped, just out of my reach. She held out the glass. Thirsty? I nodded, my tongue feeling thick and dry. I reached for it. She pulled it back. First, apologize. My throat burned. For what? For your ungrateful behavior, she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. For threatening us. For your little library research. Apologize for your arrogance. I stared at the water, at the condensation beating on the outside of the glass. One sip, just one sip. But I knew this game. This was the new rule. Give in now, and it would never end. The law, I rasped, my voice cracking. The law says you have to give me water, she smiled. It was a thin, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. What law, Sarah? She tilted the glass and poured the entire thing onto the concrete floor in front of me. The water spread out, forming a dark, mocking puddle before soaking into the unfinished drain in the center of the room. Down here, she said. Holding up the empty glass, we make the rules. She turned, climbed back up the stairs, and locked the door. The two locks, the padlock, click, scrape, thud. I dropped to my knees, pressing my face to the damp concrete, trying to lick up the last remaining drops before they disappeared. The taste of dirt and mold and mildew filled my mouth. I didn't care. I lapped at the floor like an animal until there was nothing left but a damp spot. The light stayed on. Always on. I tried to sleep, but the single harsh bulb burned through my eyelids. When exhaustion finally took me, my nightmares were of endless receipts and my mother's smile as she poured water onto the ground. Dad's visit came next. Or maybe it was the same day. He brought a notebook and a pen. Your mother tells me you're still resisting the lesson, he said, standing at the bottom of the stairs. He placed the notebook and pen on the third step, just out of my reach. I'm disappointed. I thought you were smarter. I'm hungry, I whispered. Of course you are. Hunger is the teacher. He nudged the notebook with his foot. Write your apology. 1 page, front and back, for each year we've raised you. 15 pages of gratitude. When you're done, I'll review it. If it's sufficient, perhaps we can discuss rations. I crawled forward, my body trembling with weakness, and grabbed the notebook and pen. Hope. A chance. I sat on the mattress and started writing what they wanted to hear. Dear Mom and Dad, thank you for teaching me the value of money. Thank you for making me strong. Thank you for this lesson. My hand was shaking so badly the letters were barely legible. The pen ran out of ink after 2 pages. I tried scratching the words, but it was no use. I held up the pen, showing him. He sighed, a long theatrical sigh of disappointment. That's unfortunate. It seems you've failed this task as well. Looks like you'll need to try harder next time. He took the notebook and the empty pen and left, locking the door behind him. The pattern emerged through their visits. Mom came with water I couldn't have until I showed proper gratitude. Dad brought writing supplies that always failed. They weren't just punishing me. They were playing with me. Each visit was a meticulously designed performance to break me down, a little more each time. But as I lay on that mattress, a new, cold clarity settled in. If this was a game, I had to learn the rules. They thought they were in total control, but they were wrong. They were teaching me. I started hiding breadcrumbs of defiance. When Mom demanded I kneel before she'd speak to me, I counted the seconds in my head. 1,000, 2, 1,000. I made it a game. How long could I stay on my knees before my legs gave out? 23 seconds. The next time, 30. I was building strength, even in my submission. During Dad's visits, I studied him. Really studied him. The way his left eye twitched when he was angry. How he favored his right leg, some old injury he'd never mentioned. The pattern of his breathing. Everything was data. Between visits, when I was sure they were gone, I exercised. Push-ups, my arms shaking so violently I could barely manage one. Then 2, sit-ups, my empty stomach screaming in protest. I'd run in place until the world tilted and I collapsed on the mattress. I was dying, but I would die strong. I would die fighting. The water torture continued. Mom would bring a full pitcher, set it just out of my reach, and lecture me about ungrateful children while I watched the condensation bead on the glass. Sometimes she'd accidentally spill a cupful near enough that I could press my face to the floor and lick the puddle. She'd watch with a look of pure satisfaction as I degraded myself for a few precious drops. Dad's writing assignments grew more elaborate. Write about every sacrifice we've made for you. Start from birth. But the pens were always defective. Dry, broken, missing the ink cartridge entirely. He'd shake his head sadly at my empty pages. Maybe tomorrow, Sarah. Mom's soup visit was the worst. I smelled it before the door even opened. Chicken noodle. The rich, savory steam nearly drove me insane. She sat on the stairs, eating slowly, describing each spoonful. Chicken, carrots, celery. Still warm? The noodles are so soft. I pressed myself into the farthest corner, face to the wall, trying not to watch, not to smell, not to want. All you have to do is admit you were wrong, she cooed. Admit you're grateful for our lessons. Promise to follow the fasting rules without complaint, and you can have a bowl. The words stuck in my throat. If I gave in now, I'd never get out. They'd know they'd broken me completely. I'm grateful, I whispered, louder. I'm grateful for your lessons. She smiled and ate another spoonful. I don't believe you yet. Maybe tomorrow. The soup smell lingered for hours after she left. I pressed my face into the mildewed mattress, trying to escape it, but it had soaked into everything. Dad discovered my wall scratches during his next visit. I had used a small, sharp stone I'd found to scratch tallies on the wall behind the mattress. 7 marks. 7 days. His face went dark. Destroying property now, are we? This is a load-bearing wall? He pulled out his phone. I'm photographing this. The repair for this stonework. That's easily a $100 repair. He looked at me, a cold smile on his face. You know what that means, don't you? 100 hours. Over 4 days of fasting. A debt I would have to pay after I was released. If I was ever released. He made me watch as he photographed the damage, his voice calm as he calculated the exact cost of materials and labor to fix my tiny, desperate scratches. It was a performance of theatrical cruelty, a reasonable-sounding mask hiding pure sadism. I stopped marking days after that. It only gave them more weapons to use against me. The exercise continued in secret. I focused on silent, isometric routines, pressing my palms against the cold stone walls until my muscles screamed, tensing my abdomen and legs in long, excruciating holds. Invisible rebellion that kept my body from complete atrophy. My body was failing, but my will was hardening into something they hadn't expected. Mom's water games escalated. She'd bring ice cubes and place them one by one on a plate just outside my reach, watching them melt into puddles I couldn't access. Sometimes she'd bring a damp cloth, dip it in ice water, and wipe her own face, sighing with theatrical relief at the coolness while I burned with thirst. But I was learning too. I was learning their schedules. Mom always came after her morning coffee. Her breath was still bitter with it. Dad visited in the evenings after work. His shoes still carried the dust from outside. They were creatures of habit, and habits could be exploited. I started pretending to be weaker than I was. I'd practiced collapsing dramatically, letting my limbs go limp. I'd crawl to the stairs instead of walking. I'd let my head loll, my breathing shallow. I let them think they were winning, that the end was near. It made them careless. During one of Mom's visits, she set the water pitcher closer than usual, confident in my weakness. While she lectured me about ungrateful children, I wasn't just staring at the water. I was memorizing the exact distance, the precise angle, the number of inches between my reach and her, the way she favored her non-trembling hand. Dad brought a functioning pen once. It was a mistake. He was tired, distracted by something at work, muttering about inventory discrepancies. I wrote what he wanted, pages of groveling gratitude, while memorizing the feel of the pen. Its weight, its balance, the way he clicked it. The logo on the clip, they thought they were teaching me dependence. They were teaching me patience. They were teaching me strategy, the kind of desperate, pure focus cleverness that comes only from having absolutely nothing left to lose. My body was shutting down. I could feel my organs struggling, but my mind was sharper than ever. It was focused on one thing, survival. Not just of my body, but of my spirit. They could lock me in this basement, but they couldn't lock up the part of me that refused to break. The game was changing. They just didn't know it yet. The visits became more unpredictable. Sometimes Mom would come twice in what felt like the same day. Other times, the silence stretched so long, 48, maybe 72 hours, I'd wonder if they'd forgotten me entirely. The uncertainty was another form of torture. During one of Mom's water visits, I noticed her tremor was worse. It wasn't just her hand. It was her entire arm. She tried to hide it, gripping the pitcher with both hands, but I saw it. I filed it away. I began testing boundaries in small, subtle ways. When Dad demanded I write apologies, I'd position myself differently each time. First near the stairs, then by the wall, then in the far corner. He'd bark, "Get back in the center where I can see you." But I was mapping his comfort zones. I was learning where he felt safest, where he felt threatened. The hunger had evolved. It was no longer a sharp, gnawing pain. It was a dull, constant floating ache. My body had adapted in terrifying ways. My heartbeat was slow, thready. My vision tunneled every time I stood up. But my hearing had sharpened to a razor's edge. I could track their movements upstairs, learning their routines through muffled footsteps and the creak of specific floorboards. I knew my father paced the hallway outside his office. I knew my mother rarely left her bedroom anymore. Mom's next visit brought a new, bizarre cruelty. She carried a tray of fresh fruit. The smell of strawberries and melon was so intense, so real, it nearly drove me insane. She sat on the stairs and ate, piece by piece, juice dripping down her chin. When she finished, she left the tray just out of my reach, the rinds and strawberry leaves taunting me. I waited until her footsteps faded completely, until I heard her bedroom door click shut upstairs. The tray was maybe 3 feet beyond my reach. I had been practicing. I took off my filthy, tattered shirt. I tied one sleeve to my ankle, gripped the other end, and used my body as a counterweight, casting the shirt like a fishing line. On the 4th try, it snagged the edge of the tray. I dragged it closer, inch by painful inch. The peelings had tiny bits of fruit still clinging to them. I ate every scrap, even the bitter strawberry leaves. This small secret victory energized me more than the negligible calories. I could still think. I could still plan. I could still fight. Dad's obsessive-compulsive tendencies, which I'd only vaguely noticed as a child, were now in full bloom. He always checked his watch exactly 3 times during each visit. He always touched the wooden door frame before descending. He always counted the stairs under his breath. I started leaving things slightly out of place. The mattress at a 5-degree angle. The bucket moved 1 inch to the left. Tiny disruptions to his ordered world. He'd notice immediately, his eye twitching as he corrected each imperfection. Discipline, Sarah. Order. That's what you lack. It gave me a small, thrilling measure of control over his emotions. The broken pens, they became my tools. I used their sharp, split plastic tips to work at the mortar between 2 stones in the darkest corner, a spot hidden by the stairs. Not to escape. The wall was too thick, but to create a hiding spot. A small, loose gap where I could conceal things. Mom's tremor worsened. During one water game, she fumbled. The pitcher slipped and a full cup of water splashed onto the floor, well within my reach. I didn't laugh. I didn't celebrate. I lunged for it, lapping at the puddle while she cursed and scrambled back up the stairs, more angry at her own failing body than at my small triumph. Her control was slipping. I had discovered the drain in the corner was old and rusted, but functional. When they poured water on the floor, I started positioning myself to subtly direct the flow. Not all of it reached the drain. Some pooled in the uneven concrete, creating tiny reservoirs I could return to later, in the dark. Dad's camera sessions revealed his own instability. He'd take the same photo of me, standing, sitting, lying down, dozens of times, never satisfied. Hold still. No, your arm is wrong. Look more grateful. His obsession with documentation had become a compulsion. He needed evidence of my suffering, but no amount was ever enough. I learned to ruin his shots. I'd turn slightly so shadows fell wrong. I'd blink at the exact moment of the flash. Small rebellions that sent him into fits of perfectionist rage. He'd waste entire visits trying to get the perfect shot of my degradation, his hands shaking with anger. The light bulb became my enemy and my ally. Always on, it disrupted my sleep, but it also let me study every detail of my prison. I memorized each stone, each crack. The bulb itself was old, the filament visible. I wondered how much longer it would last. Mom's final coherent visit came on what must have been a Tuesday. I knew because I'd heard the distant rumble of the garbage truck outside, its routine the only reliable marker of time. She sat on the stairs. No water, no food, just sitting. Her hands shook violently in her lap. She tried to explain something, her words slurred and tangled. Something about sacrifice. About love getting confused. About meaning to teach strength, but teaching something else. We just wanted you to see. she whispered, her eyes cloudy. The cost. It's so high. The cost. Her tremors were so bad she could barely hold the railing as she stood to leave. She forgot to lock the door. I stared at the open door for 3 full heartbeats. I was halfway to my feet, my muscles screaming, when Dad's footsteps thundered down the hall. He slammed the door shut, the lock clicking with a terrible finality. We both knew what had happened. The perfect system was breaking down. His rage was cold. He added the cost of Mom's mistake to my debt. 50 hours, he declared. For those 10 seconds of false hope. A lesson in security. But his math was more erratic than ever. His calculations no longer made sense. He'd add columns incorrectly. He'd forget items. I'd stop trying to stand when they visited. Not from weakness, but strategy. Let them think I was finished. Let them believe their victory was complete. While my body played dead, my mind was more alive than ever. The basement had become my teacher, and I was becoming its most dedicated student. Mom stopped coming entirely. I could hear her upstairs sometimes, her footsteps no longer walking, just a slow, aimless shuffling in random patterns. Dad's visits doubled in frequency, as if he were trying to maintain both roles, but he couldn't replicate her specific, personal cruelties. His were all numbers and documentation. During what I calculated was my 40th day, based on the pattern of garbage trucks and furnace cycles, Dad made his biggest mistake. The light bulb in the ceiling had been flickering for days, its filament finally giving out. It plunged the basement into an inky blackness that was absolute. This new variable enraged him. He couldn't document me. He couldn't see his experiment. The door flew open. He descended with a powerful, heavy-duty flashlight. The beam was blinding. He swept it across the basement, convinced I was using the darkness to hide something. He was right. I had been hoarding everything. Threads from the mattress, the split-open plastic from the pens, the glass shards from Mom's broken pitcher hidden in the stone wall. He was right, but he looked in the wrong places. The flashlight was a heavy metal mag light. He set it down on the bottom step to adjust his camera, needing to document the failure of the light fixture. He turned his back for just one moment. My skeletal hand shot out, not for the flashlight itself, but for the end cap. My fingers, thin as twigs, fumbled with the metal grooves. I'd watched him change batteries in it upstairs 100 times. Twist. Pull. I had the batteries, 2 heavy D-cells, in my hand and hidden under the mattress before he even turned back around. Batteries meant power. Power meant possibilities I hadn't even dreamed of. His paranoia grew. He'd check the same corner 5 times, count the stones repeatedly, measure distances that hadn't changed. His need for control was consuming him, just as hunger had consumed me. We were both prisoners now, locked in a dance of mutual destruction. The house above grew quieter. Mom's shuffling had stopped. Dad's movements were erratic, sometimes pacing all night, the floorboards creaking. The perfect family had collapsed, leaving only the basement and its occupants. The jailer, who was slowly going mad, and the prisoner, who had just found a source of power. Dad's final documented visit showed his complete unraveling. He brought every receipt from my entire life, boxes of them, setting them on the stairs. He spread them across the basement floor, trying to create some master calculation, the total, final cost of my existence. It has to balance, he muttered, his hands shaking, his eye twitching. The numbers don't lie, Sarah. But the numbers wouldn't cooperate. They swam and shifted, defying his obsessive need for order. I watched him work for hours from my mattress, neither of us speaking. His frustration mounted as his own calculations failed him. Papers scattered. Pen after pen ran dry. He was trying to solve an equation that had no solution. How to quantify a life in dollars and cents. When he finally left, he was defeated. He took the receipts, but he left something crucial. In his madness, his hands shaking with frustration, he had fumbled with the locks. The basement door had 3, the deadbolt, the internal lock, and the heavy padlock. He'd only engaged the deadbolt. His shaking, obsessive hands had betrayed him. I waited. I waited through another garbage truck cycle, another furnace rhythm. 48 hours. I needed to be sure. When I was certain he wouldn't return immediately, I made my move. The deadbolt was old. My makeshift tools, the sharp plastic from the pens, the glass shards, were crude. But the basement had taught me that crude tools in patient, desperate hands could accomplish miracles. I worked the wire from the light fixture, now useless, into the lock mechanism. Push, twist, feel for the catch. My fingers cramped. I paused, flexing them, then resumed. Time meant nothing. Only the work mattered. The lock finally gave. A soft, metallic snick that sounded like thunder in the darkness. I pushed against the door. It moved an inch, then stopped. My heart hammered. Something was blocking it. I pushed harder, feeling the obstruction shift with a scrape. A chair. He'd started barricading the door from the outside, but the chair was light. Using the door as leverage, I worked it aside inch by inch. The scraping was too loud. I paused, listening. No response from upstairs. Mom must be in one of her medication hazes. I continued working the chair aside until the gap was wide enough for my emaciated frame. 78 pounds, no, probably closer to 60 by now, had its advantages. I emerged into the kitchen. I was free. I stood there, blinking against the sliver of dawn light coming through the window. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the stove ticked. Normal sounds that felt miraculous. My legs trembled so badly I had to grip the counter to stay upright. I waited for the dizziness to pass. No time for weakness. Dad would return for lunch in 4 hours. His routine never varied. I needed supplies. Food, water, clothes, money. But first, I had to ensure Mom couldn't interfere. I crept upstairs, each step careful. Her bedroom door was open. She lay in bed, pills scattered on the nightstand, breathing shallowly but steadily. Her purse sat on the dresser. I found 43 and change. Her cell phone. Her car keys. I took it all. She stirred, a low moan, but didn't wake. The medication had her deep. My old room was exactly as I'd left it, a dusty museum. Clothes still in the closet. I dressed in layers, hiding my skeletal frame. Everything hung on me, but it would do. I filled a backpack with essentials. More clothes, the hidden cash from my old dresser drawer, $27 I'd saved from birthday cards years ago. The kitchen. I couldn't eat much, I knew that. Refeeding syndrome? The library book had taught me that too. I took small, painful bites of bread. Sips of water. A banana that my stomach immediately violently rejected. I cleaned up the mess, leaving no evidence. Dad's office drew me. His precious calculations. I found them immediately. Boxes of receipts. Ledgers detailing my debt. And the camera, sitting on his desk, its memory card full of basement documentation. Full of evidence. I took the camera and one ledger. Proof, if I needed it. Then I noticed his computer, still logged in. His obsession extended to digital files. Folders labeled Sarah Expenses, Household Burden, Calcs, years of spreadsheets. I inserted a thumb drive from his desk and copied everything. The progress bar crawled. 20%, 40%. Time was ticking, the files finished. I pocketed the drive and moved to leave, then stopped. On his desk sat a framed photo. Our family years ago, before the calculations, before the basement. I looked healthy. They looked human. I left it there and headed for the garage. The front door was too risky. Neighbors would notice a skeletal teenager stumbling down the street. Mom's car keys felt heavy in my pocket. I'd never driven, but I'd watched. How hard could it be? The garage door opener was on the kitchen wall. I pressed it, wincing at the loud mechanical grinding. The car started on the third try, the engine turning over with a cough. I adjusted the seat, my feet barely able to reach the pedals. The car lurched forward. I slammed the brakes, heart racing. Deep breath. Gentle. You know this. You've watched. Gentle pressure on the gas. The car rolled down the driveway. I made it to the street, turning randomly, just needing distance. Each intersection was a victory. Each mile a miracle. I drove until the gas light came on. A rest stop appeared ahead. I pulled in, parking crooked but safe. My hands shook so badly I could barely turn off the engine. I'd done it. I'd escaped, but escape was only the beginning. I had $70, a car I couldn't legally drive, and parents who would eventually notice their prisoner had graduated. I found a payphone. I dialed the only number I remembered, a number I hadn't called in years. My aunt, Mom's sister, who'd stopped visiting after some argument I'd never understood. The phone rang once, twice. She answered on the third ring. Aunt Mary? I managed 3 words before my voice cracked and I collapsed against the phone booth. She heard enough. An address. A promise to wait. Help was coming. I sat in the car, doors locked, watching the highway. Dad would be home by now. He'd find the empty basement. The unlocked door. The missing evidence. The truth that his perfect system had failed. My aunt's car appeared as the sun set. She stepped out, and I saw the shock register on her face as she saw me in the light. But she didn't hesitate. She wrapped me in a blanket and helped me to her car, leaving my mother's behind. We drove through the night. She asked no questions, just handed me small bottles of water and crackers. I dozed between sips, my body finally believing it was safe enough to rest. I woke in a hospital room. An IV in my arm, monitors beeping. A kind-faced doctor was explaining refeeding syndrome, severe organ damage, long-term effects, but also recovery, possibility, future. The police came. I showed them the ledger, the camera, the thumb drive. They took notes with grim, serious faces. My parents were arrested 2 days later. Dad had been found in the basement, surrounded by his scattered receipts, trying to calculate where his system went wrong. Mom was barely coherent. The prosecutor said it was one of the worst, most systematic cases of child abuse she'd ever seen. The psychological torture, the basement prison, all meticulously documented by my father's own obsessive need to record everything. They both pled guilty. Dad got 15 years. Mom got 10 with mandatory medical treatment in a secure facility. I didn't attend the sentencing. I was too busy learning to eat again, learning to walk without falling, learning to exist without calculating the cost. Recovery wasn't a straight line, but my aunt became my guardian. She never once mentioned the cost. She just provided, the way parents are supposed to. I returned to school. I went to college on a scholarship for abuse survivors. I studied nutrition. I'm 32 now. I have a healthy weight, a stable job at a children's hospital, a good life. The girl who weighed 78 pounds feels like a different person. But I carry her with me. She's the reason I survived. My parents are eligible for parole next year. I won't attend the hearing. The basement spoke for me. The evidence convicted them. My survival is testimony enough. I eat dinner now without calculating. I sleep without hunger. I live without debt. The basement is behind me, but its lessons remain. I survived. I escaped. I graduated.